Okay, so World War One has begun. Here we go. All right. So first thing, as World War One begins, alliances begin to change. Again, one of those main causes of World War One are the alliances and the intertwining, very confusing web that is created by these alliances. Okay, so they do begin to change, and one major change is Italy. Italy is going to take themselves out of the Triple Alliance and not be aligned with Germany anymore. And what they're going to do is they're going to line up with the Allies. Of course, Germany will have to form a new alliance, and this is way past Bismarck because now we're in 1914, and they're going to create what is called the Central Powers, which will be them, again, with Austria-Hungary, the dual monarchy here. But then it adds in the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire was an add-in because they were trying to reassert themselves. And like I mentioned in the last video, the Ottoman Empire is being called the sick man of Europe. They are a dying empire, but this is kind of like their one last ditch effort to really assert themselves on the main stage and have influence in Europe and in the Middle East like they had previously. All right, so Italy's going to join France, England, and Russia, of course, Belgium, and then later on by 1917 and 1918, the U.S. joins in. This group will be called the Allies. So there are your four different alliances that you're going to have to know. But you're seeing just movements, and of course, this is going to cause a whole bunch of chaos when we get to the Treaty of Versailles down the road. Okay, so at the very beginning of the war, they believed this war was going to be very short. As a matter of fact, when they went off to war in September and into October, the idea was that this war would be over right around Christmas, maybe much shorter than that, and of course, that was not the case. All right, so what Germany decides it's going to do is it's going to fight a two-front war. With the Triple Entente the way it was, and of course going to the Allies, France and Russia had Germany surrounded. So Germany decides that it will fight a two-front war, and their plan is going to be to attack France first. The thing with Russia that they pay attention to is Russia's a large country with a lot of people. So they figure if they can go after France first, who is their natural rival and their enemy, they can sweep back into Russia very quickly. Okay, so here's what Germany decides to do. And they feel like they're stronger than Russia. So what they think is they can take Paris, the capital of France. I'm sorry, stronger than France. They can take Paris, the capital of France, in 40 days. Okay, and this was called the Schlieffen Plan. And essentially what Germany is going to do is they're going to sweep in from the north and take Belgium and take northern France and take Paris out of the equation and then break all of France down to where they have control of it and then refocus their attention back to Russia. They knew Russia was weak because they're not as industrialized. However, because of the population and simply what is called attrition, they were worried about fighting Russia. All right. So if they take France, which they thought it would only take 40 days, but may take a little longer, then all the attention can go back on Russia, and they can definitely win the war. And that's why Germany didn't think it was going to take long, because they felt like they were just more powerful. Of course, they were very, very wrong. They very much undermined or underestimated what France could do and how they go into a stalemate type of warfare, which we're going to discuss here in a second. All right. And again, like I mentioned, what Germany doesn't plan for is a large population, but they do know that Russia is weak, and that's why they wait for them to go after them second. All right. So on the Western Front, of course, underestimating the French, there's going to be a stalemate. The French border between France, Belgium, and Germany, they're going to run into a stalemate. This is going to be a major area of conflict throughout the entire war. Okay. And in this case, neither side really does gain ground. They're going to lose thousands and thousands and thousands of men at a time and never really gain ground, not gain any land. And it comes to a constant type of warfare. They're using this old idea of warfare where you line up and fire, but they have modern technology. So they try to do something different, which is when they go into trench warfare. So both armies begin to build long trenches along the ground as their method for protection, 6 to 8 feet deep. But the problem is, to fight, you need artillery fire coming over the top. You need to cross an area between the trenches called no man's land, where you're extremely exposed to violence. And you got to do what's called going over the top. You've got to come out of the trench. And once you come out of the trench, you're exposed. And of course, with machine guns, like I mentioned earlier, one German soldier writes, excuse me, I didn't even have to look. I just moved my machine gun left and right, and I can maul people down and take out thousands at a time. All right, so this is the Western Front with the 450 miles of trenches. You can see how they weave down through Belgium, through the western or eastern part of France, the western part of Germany, right along the German border. And you can see where the fronts were built. I mean, you're literally digging these trenches very close to one another. All right. So the original front line, and here it is in September, where the Schlieffen Plan tries to go into work, is here. But if you notice, that line gets moved back by December 29th to what is the Western Front. From this point forward, you're not going to have a whole lot of movement between these two places. All right, and they're not going to move into Germany. They're not going to move into France, and a lot of people are going to die. There's going to be major battles at places like Dunkirk and Ypres, and the Battle of the Somme, which is going to be over here. All right, Verdun. These places are going to see major casualties as we move forward. Okay, so this is called trench warfare. All right, many casualties, not gaining much ground. I'll show you some different characteristics that go along with this, but it was dangerous. People literally going over the top and being shot and killed right on the spot, which is why they had so many deaths when it comes to this type of warfare. Plus, with mustard gas or chlorine gas being shot into the air, it sits over the land and just kind of falls into the trenches, and it can very much kill you that way as well. I'll show you that video at another time. The other type of warfare that's going to go on that became very popular but also very deadly was what was called unrestricted submarine warfare. And go ahead and underline that. You're talking about submarines shooting down boats. Now, when it's called unrestricted, it's because there are no limits to who can be shot down. Normally in war, you only shoot down ships that are warships. All right, I take that phone call, sorry. This unrestricted submarine warfare is going to help bring the United States into war. Okay, their whole idea was to destroy other navies that had an advantage. They could put U-boats all over the seas, which could not be tracked by the ships. They could shoot them down and keep the movement. Of course, a big issue is, which will come down the road here with this unrestricted submarine warfare, is the help that the U.S. was giving. Even though the U.S. is isolated, what they are doing is sending passenger ships across the Atlantic, which were protected. But what the U.S. began to do, especially with England and France, is put goods, ammunition, and resources that they would need on those ships. Once the Germans figure this out, they begin to shoot down those passenger ships. Okay? And again, I mentioned this earlier, it was against the war, against the rules of war to do this. So ammo is on these ships, and the Germans, they don't like that idea because they're trying to win the war and exert their dominance. Okay? So the Germans begin to sink these ships, and one ship that's going to be sunk is going to be a British liner called the Lusitania. And of course, on that British liner are 128 Americans. Now, this happens in 1915, and the Americans don't enter the war quite yet. That'll happen in 1917, but this is kind of like the first straw being broken over the camel's back that's going to encourage the Americans to get out of this isolationist idea and get into World War I. All right, so there is at least one reason to enter the war, but it's not the only one. The other reason is more really propaganda, but it's an alliance that's going to be created between the German government and the Mexican government. You understand, folks, the Americans had taken land in southwest United States that the Mexican government had claimed. And of course, there had been conflict there for some time. So what the Germans are going to agree with the Mexicans is if the Mexican government draws the U.S. attention away by trying to invade the U.S., then when the Germans win World War I, it's going to help Mexico. And of course, there is some legitimacy to this, but there's also a lot of lies here because the Americans want to get in. The American government wants to get into World War I, but it needs a really legitimate reason, and this really becomes the legitimate reason. So the propaganda that is created will be called the Zimmermann telegram. All right, this Zimmermann telegram is going to be the propaganda the U.S. needs to really get into World War I. And by 1917, when the Zimmermann telegram is intercepted, then the U.S. has an official reason to get into World War I. Okay. And we'll discuss propaganda in class, but if you look at these again, if we go back to the political cartoons we've done with imperialism, you can see the type of propaganda, the issues between countries, especially the one on the right. You can see here, especially with this cartoon, or this U.S. enlistment, Army enlistment cartoon, that it's showing the Germans in a very negative light. Okay, you can tell he's German because he has the point on his helmet. The idea of militarism being one of the main causes of World War One. Destroy the mad brute. He's seen as a gorilla. Of course, he is this awful, terrible human animal that is coming to America, which is on the shores here, to take our women. All right, again, look, it's a King Kong factor here where they take the beautiful white woman. You notice culture on the stick that has blood dripping from it. The one thing, though, too, I want you to look at, and this is very important, is there's a lot of racist undertones in this propaganda. I mean, the gorilla is a very dark black, and look at the woman that he's holding is a pasty white blonde-haired woman, and that is the Lady Liberty of America versus this evil, dark character of Germany. So, in the next video, we'll talk about what happens on the Eastern Front, okay? And we'll go into the Treaty of Versailles and the Russian Revolution.